In this video, I want to show two examples of changes in aggregate supply. So for your reference for the book, this is Chapter 10, Section 5. One of these examples we will do in class, and then I've kind of got an additional example just to give you some extra practice to work through, okay? Now, this example we did in class, okay? And this is an example of an unanticipated decrease in aggregate supply. So the idea or the example goes like this. Suppose that a war breaks out in the Middle East, which is not too terribly far-fetched, and drastically reduces the world supply of oil. So something happens and all the oil in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Iran and Iraq, all those oil-rich countries, is cut off from the rest of the world. So this is a major resource for developed countries today. So we would call this, or this would be an example of a negative supply shock, okay? So this would be kind of a negative shock to our resources, okay? So what's going to happen to short-run aggregate supply? Well, if it's a negative thing that happens to resources, then short-run aggregate supply is going to decrease. So SRAS will decrease. This means the curve will shift to the left, okay? So that's what's going to happen in the short run if war breaks out in the Middle East and the world supply of oil is drastically reduced, okay? Short-run aggregate supply will shift to the left, right? And we'll graph that on the next slide, right? What we'll also take a look at is how does the economy transition back to the long-run equilibrium, okay? Now, it turns out, with this example, there's kind of two ways it could transition back, okay? So, if this supply shock is temporary, right, so if it's temporary, that is, if, cooler heads prevail in the Middle East and everybody realizes, we didn't really mean to fight, and if it's temporary and if the war settles down and goes away, then what's going to happen is those resources become available again, and that short-run aggregate supply curve just shifts back to where it was. So if it's temporary, SRAS shifts back to where it was before the conflict started, okay? However, if it is permanent, permanent as if I could spell permanent. Here we go. Permanent, right? That means the Middle East is mired in war for the foreseeable future, right? Then what's going to happen? The short-run aggregate supply curve will stay decreased. It'll stay shifted to the left, but the long-run aggregate supply will decrease. That is, it will shift to the left as well because now in the long run, the world has a reduced amount of resources available. So let's go ahead and graph these, okay? So in the short run, let's take a look at what happens, and let's start with our graph here on the left. Let's label it real GDP and price level. Okay, let's go ahead and label both so I don't forget. I have my professor dock me points on the exam. Okay, we're going to start here on the left, right? And let's take a look at where we are initially. Let's draw in an aggregate demand curve. Okay. A short-run aggregate supply curve, something like this. Okay. SRAS. And let's label it with a 1, and let's put in our long-run aggregate supply curve, which could be about right here. Okay. LRAS. Okay, and we are here initially in long-run equilibrium. So let's put this here. This is our equilibrium price level, PL star. And our long-run equilibrium real GDP star, okay? So this is where we are initially. And then war breaks out in the Middle East, and as we mentioned, this is going to be a negative supply shock. So our short-run aggregate supply curve in the short run is going to decrease. That is, it's going to shift to the left. Okay. So let's go ahead and draw this in. SRAS2. Okay. It shifts to the left here. There's a arrow over there indicating it shifts to the left. Okay. So in the short run, the economy is going to move from point A to point B here, and our equilibrium price level is going to rise. So this is price level, we'll call it 2, put a star there, okay? And right, the economy will slip into a recession, okay? Notice real GDP, call it 2, is less than before, okay? So in the short run, right, short run aggregate supply decreases, it shifts to the left. The economy kind of falls into a recession. Real GDP falls below long-run potential, as we can see down here. Price level rises. And we know when an economy falls into a recession and real GDP falls below its long-run potential, that means unemployment is going to rise. So unemployment rates will be higher. Okay? All right. So now, in the long run, if it is temporary, okay, that is, if the war ends and things go back to normal, then what happens is this short-run aggregate supply curve shifts and transitions back to where it was, okay? So let's draw this over here on the right, and just to, there we go, let's copy this, and then I'm going to try to, let's see if I can do this. Come on, paste, work. Okay, good. Let's see if I can grab this and move it. Oh, bad. Okay, let's do this, and then let's do this. Come on, can I? Dang. Okay, that didn't work. Let's just redraw this. It's a little embarrassing. Okay. Let's go ahead and just redraw this, okay? So we are here. Let's draw in our aggregate demand curve here. And this is why I have PowerPoint. Anyway, all right. And we've got our short-run aggregate supply curve at SRAS2, and we are somewhere around here. Okay, SRAS2. And our longer aggregate supply is right around here. Okay, LRAS. Okay. So the economy is right here at point B. Okay. So if it is temporary, what that means is that in the long run, that the short-run aggregate supply curve will shift back to where it was before, which goes right through here. Okay. SRAS1, right? It shifts back to where it was before, okay? And the economy transitions back to point A here, okay? It just moves back down this way. Therefore, the price level falls back down to where it was, price level, star, real GDP, star, okay? So, if it's temporary, that's how it's going to play out. In the short run, economy falls into recession, but if the war ends and the economy gets access to those resources again, the short-run aggregate supply just shifts back out to the right, and the economy goes back to point A, and everything goes back to the way it was. Okay. Now, if on the other hand, good, let's copy this. Suppose that the war in the Middle East never ends, it goes on forever, and it's permanent, right? Now, it's going to be a little different, okay? So in the short run, we still have the same graph here, okay? But now, can I paste this again? Paste. And let's paste. Oh, man. I got an idea. But undo that. we're going to go here. We're going to paste. No, okay, we're going to paste. Okay, come on. We're going to go paste. There we go. Then we're going to move this over here. Then we're going to copy it. Then we're going to go over here. Now I go paste. Look at that. Okay, good. All right, so let's put this. Whatever. Okay. So now we've got this here. Okay. All right, so now on the left here, right, if it's permanent, and what happens is our short-run aggregate supply curve stays shifted over to the left there, and the long-run aggregate supply now decreases because we permanently don't have access to these resources. LRAS 2, okay. It shifts over here to the left, and therefore point B here becomes our new long-run equilibrium outcome, okay? Which means that our transition from A to B in the short run over here becomes our new long run. We essentially stay here at point B if it is permanent, okay? Okay, so let's summarize exactly what we did and delete this. Okay, delete that. So, in the short run, we know short run aggregate supply is going to decrease. This causes real GDP to fall below its long-run potential, i.e. the economy goes into a recession. Okay. The unemployment rate's going to rise above its natural rate. Our price level and interest rates rise as well. Okay. Now the long-run response is different. If the shift is temporary, then as we saw before, short-run aggregate supply goes back to where it was. However, if it's permanent, the long-run aggregate supply curve will shift to the left, and we kind of stay at this new equilibrium with a lower overall real GDP and a higher price level. Okay, so let's do one more example. We'll call this example 4. And this time we're going to have an increase in aggregate supply. But this time it's going to be permanent from the get-go. So suppose there's an invention of some new farm equipment that makes existing farms twice as productive. Okay. So this is going to increase short-run aggregate supply. When productivity is increased, that means short-run aggregate supply is increased. Things are just more productive. So an increase in short-run aggregate supply is going to be a shift to the right of short-run aggregate supply. Now, as we think about the long run, right, there really is no kind of transition to the long run. We kind of move to the long run where the long run aggregate supply curve adjusts because this is a permanent increase in productivity. Therefore, right, the long run aggregate supply curve is also going to shift to the right. Shifts right. Okay. So let's go ahead and draw this up. This diagram is a little easier because we just have to draw one diagram. Okay. So let's go ahead and label everything. Real GDP, price level, and let's go and draw our economy initially in long run equilibrium before everything happens. Aggregate demand, short run aggregate supply here. Okay, this RAS. And our long run aggregate supply. Let's go ahead and draw that in. LRAS. Okay. And our economy initially is in equilibrium with this price level. PL star and real GDP star, and we'll call it 1. Okay. Now, we know there's some new invention that increases farm productivity. So both our long run and our short run aggregate supply curve, because it's permanent, right? Both curves are going to shift and increase to the right. Okay. So let's go ahead and draw that in. It doesn't matter which one you want to draw first. go ahead and draw in, let's do short run aggregate supply, shift it out here, let's say, nice big increase, okay, SRAS, we'll call this 2 and this is 1, so a nice big increase in short run aggregate supply, okay. Well, we know long run aggregate supply increases as well, okay. This is LRAS2, and this is 1 up here. And we show an increase in long run aggregate supply, okay? So, all right, price level 2, it's going to be lower than before. And this is going to be our new real GDP star. Okay. All right. So if there's a permanent increase in productivity, this is going to cause both our long run aggregate supply curve and our short run aggregate supply curve to shift to the right. Right? Again, this is kind of an example of what we covered earlier, which is secular deflation. Okay. That is, we're going to have a lower price level and an increased amount of real GDP. So to summarize, our short run response is kind of the same as the long run response. Short run aggregate supply increases, real GDP increases, but so does our long run potential. Unemployment kind of remains the same because it's going to have a new natural rate, but price level and interest rates will fall. Okay. So the long run response, right? This is a permanent increase in long run aggregate supply, so the economy transitions to a higher long run potential output. But the main thing is that we're going to have higher real GDP and a lower price level. Okay, so those are two examples of changes in aggregate supply that hopefully are helpful.